Okay, so we're going to dive back into this production possibilities curve for a few minutes and look a little more detail here. So the first thing we're going to ask is, what does the production possibilities curve tell us? Well, it's a basic economic model designed to create a visual representation of two things. The first is trade-offs. One of the things we'll notice about this curve is as we increase or decrease along the line, what we're doing is giving up one for another. And of course, that also illustrates this concept of opportunity cost. What are we giving up to obtain another item? So using the curve allows us to see how changes in production impact individuals, companies, and even nations. And it's important to remember that this is a basic model. The production possibilities curve is far more complicated. You have to understand that we're looking at it from the perspective of two. So what we're going to do is look at Apple, and we're going to look at iPads, and we're going to look at laptops. Well, we know that Apple also produces desktops, Apple TVs, iPad minis, and iPhones. So there's a lot of different products being produced. We're going to focus on two. So we're trying to take a basic model to understand how things work on a grander scale. And so that's one of those things you have to remember, is that we're looking at it at a very, very basic, so that we understand what's taking place. In reality, most things are far more complicated because there's so many more choices in the production possibilities curve to look at. So we narrow it down to two to get a better idea. Okay, so here we have our model curve, and we're looking at laptops and iPads again. This is what we looked at in Unit 1. So what we're saying is Apple production possibilities, and our numbers here are in the thousands. So what that would mean is if Apple produced only laptops, they'd be at 100,000. If they only produced iPads, they'd be about 73,000. Of course, Apple's not going to produce just one. We know they're going to produce a combination. So we're going to say point A is our combination point. So at point A, Apple's going to produce 71,000 laptops, 51,000 iPads. But what happens when they go to B, and why would they go to B? So point B, we'll see here, drops laptop production and increases iPad production. So for production point B, we see 40,000 laptops are being produced, and now we see 68,000 iPads are being produced. The reason why Apple will shift here is they're looking at the market. What they notice, of course, within the market is more people are buying tablets than they are laptops. More specifically, people are buying iPads more than they are buying any tablet, and they're buying those tablets more than they are laptops now. So Apple shifts production from point A to point B. Now remember, every single point along the line is efficient, meaning that they use all possible resources, and that's what they're looking for. So we see this shift from A to B. Laptop production fell 31,000 units, while iPad production increased by 17,000 units. So there was definitely this shift. Now we can look at it from a percentage perspective, which is exactly what I'm going to ask you to do in a homework. So laptop production fell by 44%. 40,000 minus 71,000 is 31,000 divided by 71,000 equals 0.436. 0.436, so we're just going to round up and say 44 times 100. So we get 44% ignoring the negative sign. So what we saw is that Apple reduced their laptop production by 44%. And in doing so, it allowed them to increase iPad production by 17,000 units. So that's what we're looking at. They shifted resources to reduce laptop production by 44%, thus increasing their iPad production to 68,000 units. Okay, so this next slide, we want to look at the inefficiency and impossibility. So when we're talking about this, let's take point A in this case. So point A is inside the line. So points inside the curve are always possible, but never efficient. Any point inside that curve is absolutely producible. You can do it all day long, but you don't want to. The reason why, of course, is fairly simple. If all points along the curve are efficient, then all points inside the curve are not efficient. There's a waste. You cannot afford to be wasting your resources, because what that means is you have the opportunity to produce more and sell more, but you're making the choice not to. So anything inside that curve is simply inefficient, and it's not a desirable outcome because there's greater profit to be made along the line. So when we take out and look at B, what we notice about B is an impossibility. B lies outside our current ability to produce. So points outside the curve are impossible with our current technological knowledge. In other words, today we would say B is simply, we can't do it. It's impossible. There's no way to produce at B. However, eventually we'll get to B. What will happen is the curve will bulge outward. So as we develop new technology, the PPC will bulge outward. So new technological advances, and essentially you can think of it as in terms of, this is what's been happening over the course of history since the Industrial Revolution in the early 1800s, is that we've seen the production possibilities curve bulge outward more and more and more because of the fact that we're able to use more resources. Basically what happens is we can make more products without having to actually purchase more resources. So our resources become more efficient. You can think along the lines of, let's say, employees. If your employees could produce 73,000 iPads, and now because of new technology, your employees can produce more iPads without using any more materials, well, now you're more efficient. And you can think about the cars in that sense. When they developed these assembly lines, and now of course robots, it allows them to be more efficient, more productive. Therefore the curve bulges outward. Okay, so our last question here is, why does this matter? So one of the things we have to think about is what happens if the company gets it wrong. You got to understand there's all these types of possibilities. Remember, every single point along the line is efficient. Thus, every single point on that line is some sort of production possibility, some combination they can use. So if you're the company, how do you determine what combination? And you're looking at all these market factors, the market's changing, you're trying to establish what you're doing. And so if they get it wrong, what happens, of course, is maybe they're producing too many laptops, which means they've got a surplus, and not enough iPads, which means they have a shortage of iPads. So they have all of these decisions, and it's got to constantly be adjusted based on what the market's doing. So if you're Apple and you released that iPad that first year, well, when you did that, you had to shift resources because what you found, of course, is you couldn't produce fast enough for people. And you see that with the iPhone every year. Every single year, one of the things you see with Apple is they release iPhones and they never have enough. One of the questions, of course, is from a corporate perspective, is it sometimes good to get it wrong on purpose? In other words, is Apple purposely missing their combinations to generate a shortage of iPhones? And why would they do that? Well, it's pretty easy to see why. Every single time they do it, it makes massive news coverage. Apple is all over the news. You see these long lines of people waiting on phones. Now, ultimately, they all get those phones, but it generates so much press for Apple. And also, it's a perspective thing. If there are long lines of people waiting on that phone and you just can't get one, you try, and there's always a shortage, that would seem to suggest that there's just a massive demand for iPads and iPhones and those types of devices. And if you're able to generate something that looks like monstrous demand, well, all of a sudden now it seems like, hey, everybody wants that product. And that's good press for Apple. So sometimes missing those combinations is not exactly a bad thing for companies.